So in the last lesson, we built this 7-note scale, this A major scale, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, and G sharp. Now, if we were to go back to our original chromatic scale and we were to start that same whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern, but we were to start on, let's say, the note D, then we would wind up with a different set of notes. We'd wind up with D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and coming back round to D, the octave. So we'd wind up with 7 different notes, and that's what we'd call the D major scale. So the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern, that does not change. It always produces a major scale. It only produces a major scale. If you want the A major scale, then you apply that pattern to the chromatic scale starting on A. If you want a C sharp major scale, then you apply it starting on C sharp. But for our example, we're just looking at these 7 notes in A major. I just wanted to point out that the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern can be used to retrieve all 12 major scales. So now we want to look at building chords. Well, this is an A major scale, and it won't surprise you that it is fundamental to creating an A major chord. Now, the way we build chords for the most part is what's called tertian harmony, and it involves retrieving thirds from a scale based on some origin point. For the sake of simplicity, let's start by assigning some identifiers to each one of these 7 notes. We're going to call A the root, B is going to be the second, C sharp will be the third, D the fourth, E the fifth, F sharp the sixth, and G sharp the seventh. If we take the root, the third, and the fifth, we get what we call an A major triad. If we add in G sharp, so we have A, C sharp, E, and G sharp, we get what we call an A major 7 chord. Now a triad only consists of 3 notes. A 7 chord typically consists of 4 notes. But let's return to this concept of a triad where we just have a root, a third, and a fifth. And let's recognize that we can start that same pattern of root, third, and fifth from any point in the scale. So for example, if we were to start on B, and we were to call B our root, then D would be the third, and F sharp would be the fifth, and we'd wind up with B, D, and F sharp. This is what we call a B minor triad. So far we've produced an A major triad and a B minor triad. And it's very common in music study, music academics, and music theory to refer to chords using Roman numerals. The reason for this is that Roman numerals have upper and lower cases. And we use uppercase to relate that we're talking about a major chord, and we use lowercase Roman numerals to indicate that we are talking about a minor chord. So we would call a chord built off A in this key a 1 chord, and we would use an uppercase Roman numeral to indicate that it is a 1 chord, but it is also a major chord because it's uppercase. We would use a lowercase 2 in Roman numerals to indicate that a chord built off of our B is, first of all, it's the 2 chord. It's based on the 2nd note in our key, but it also turns out being a minor chord. Now there are patterns throughout music, and one of the most useful to understand is that when you go through this process and you build a chord off of each of the 7 scale degrees here, you build a chord off of A and then B and then C sharp and so on and so forth, you wind up with 7 chords. And there's a pattern because 1, 4, and 5 chords will always be major, where 2, 3, and 6 chords will always be minor. The chord built off the 7th degree is unique because it creates what we call a diminished triad. And if you add the 7th to that, you get a minor 7th and a diminished triad. You get a G sharp in this context, a B, and a D. And then the 7th would be F sharp. So you wind up with what we call a half-diminished chord, or a minor 7 flat 5 chord. We haven't really talked about using this chord very much in this course, and although it's a useful chord and it's very musical, it also sort of justifies its own set of topics. So I'm not going to address it a whole lot here, but I want you to recognize this pattern of major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, and then half-diminished. And these are the chords you're always going to get in any major scale. So going back to our chromatic scale, if we were to apply the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, starting on the note G, then we would wind up with G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. A totally different set of 7 notes. There's no C sharp in there, there's no G sharp in there, but you'd still wind up with the 1 chord being major, the 4 and 5 being major, and then the 2, 3, and 6 being minor, and the 7th chord being half diminished. So we're exploring and discovering here that there are some useful patterns for building scales, and then again, useful patterns for recognizing and understanding what chords are available to us within a key. So now what we see is when we talk about a 1 chord, we know what we're talking about. When we talk about a 5 chord or a 2 chord, we know what we're talking about. We recognize that in the context of major, a 1 chord's always major and a 2 chord's always minor, for example. So it's a really elegant way to talk about chords because a 1 chord is a 1 chord whether we're in the key of A major or G major or C major. It's always going to be a major chord as long as it's a major scale. We're going to see in the next couple of lessons it's slightly different if we build a minor scale and start building chords there, but we're still going to see that there's a pattern of major and minor chords that applies all majors, just as there's a pattern of major and minor chords that are built from all minor chords. So let's move forward now and talk more about how to build minor scales and then subsequently how to build chords in those kinds of keys.